Lockhart Perspective. And we will continue with part 2. A front company for criminals. In 2009, Pelosi Jr. was recruited to be the president of an environmental investment company called Natural Blue Resources. The firm was ostensibly formed to find and use new underground aquifers in New Mexico, but a Securities Exchange Commission investigation found that the company was in fact secretly controlled by 2 convicted criminals who used Pelosi Jr. and others as a front to let them personally profit from the company without disclosing their past brushes with the law to investors. According to charges filed in 2014, Pelosi Jr. was recruited to create the firm along with former New Mexico Governor and Attorney General Tony Anaya by 2 consultants named James Cohen and Joseph Corazzi. Cohen had been previously jailed for financial fraud, and Corazzi had been charged with breaking federal security laws and was permanently barred from acting as an officer of a public company. Though Anaya was charged, Pelosi was not. Pelosi Jr. served as president and board member of Natural Blue from its public stock exchange listed August of 2009 for 5 months and served on the board of another company run by Cohen's wife. When approached by thedailymail.com, the SEC declined to comment on Pelosi Jr.'s involvement in the case. However, the SEC wrote in its conclusion to the case that Pelosi Jr. did not play a meaningful role in one of the key transactions for Natural Blue's scheme. He strenuously objected to proposed fundraising contracts and was ousted from the board by the accused fraudsters and ultimately appeared as a witness against them. Fraud and bribery in Atlanta. In October of 2013, Pelosi Jr. landed a job as the vice president of a biofuel company, Fog Fuels, according to a corporate press release. And if he had only Googled his new business partner, Pelosi would have known that he was wading into murky territory because just 1 month earlier, the SEC announced that it had filed charges against the company and its founder, Paul Marshall. The federal complaint said Marshall stole $3 million from mostly elderly investors in Fog Fuels and another of his companies to pay for a variety of Marshall's personal expenses, including luxury vacations, child support and alimony payments, and private school tuition and camps for his children. At the time, an Atlanta, Georgia official was found guilty of helping arrange city contracts for Marshall's wireless internet company in exchange for bribes. Marshall had previously agreed to cooperate with the prosecutors in his $3 million fraud case and was not charged in the bribery case. Fog Fuels, of which Pelosi Jr. was vice president at the time, also won an Atlanta City Council resolution to turn waste restaurant grease into biofuel. A councilman was subject to an ethics complaint over the vote, but the contract was never taken up, and neither Pelosi Jr. nor the company itself were charged in the FBI bribery probe. Fog Fuels was dissolved at the end of 2015, and in 2018, Marshall was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for defrauding investors. After cooperating with the FBI on the bribery case, he was released in 2020. In 2014, Pelosi Jr. moved on to 2 new roles. The first was an independent director of the Los Angeles-based drug company Targeted Medical Pharma, which a year after Pelosi Jr. left, the firm was accused by the Food and Drug Administration of testing drugs on people without authorization. Pelosi Jr. quit the company 7 months after joining, according to the SEC filing, and left Fog Fuel's position off of his LinkedIn resume completely. After receiving a warning letter, the company told the FDA it complied with all the applicable FDA regulations, closed quote, and had not broken any rules because it was not marketing its product. Theramine is as a drug in the United States, but rather as medical food. Targeted Medical Pharma told thedailymail.com the investigation was a clerical issue on behalf of the FDA. The FDA did not take any further action against the company. The next one was fake United Nations charity. Pelosi Jr. did decide to include a new full-time role on his LinkedIn resume in October of 2014 as a business development executive of Corporate Governance Initiative, or CGI, though he has since removed it. SEC filings say CGI is a nonprofit group focused on transparency, capitalism, and building sustainable organizations, and that Pelosi was promoted to the executive director of the organization in December of 2015. Ironically, it was through this ethics-focused job that he developed close ties with an alleged scammer accused by the DOJ of running a fake charity. In November of 2019, prosecutors accused the New York-based executive Asa St. Clair of running a cryptocurrency scam through his charity, the World Sports Alliance, which they described as a sham affiliate of the United Nations. St. Clair allegedly defrauded investors in IGOBIT, a digital currency that he claimed WSA, or World Sports Alliance, was developing, but which turned out to be the fraudulent bait with which to lure victim investors, the DOJ said. Prosecutors said that the alleged fraudster recruited investors between 2017 and 2019 by claiming that their money would help developing countries around the world, but instead used the cash to pay his personal expenses, including dinners in Manhattan restaurants, airline tickets, and online shopping. St. Clair, who was reportedly arrested in California trying to get on a plane to Madagascar by way of Paris, has been charged with wire fraud and faces up to 20 years in prison if convicted. He is pleading not guilty. His case is due to be heard in March. Pelosi Jr. endorsed the allegedly fraudulent digital currency on his website in January of 2018, saying, "IGOBIT is the absolute best offering I have ever seen," closed quote. Press releases show Pelosi Jr.'s organization, CGI, had close ties with St. Clair and his alleged scam charity. A December 2016 CGI press release proclaimed that St. Clair had officially endorsed the organization, announcing he will be working closely with them and pouring praise on Pelosi Jr. St. Clair described Pelosi Jr. as a longtime associate, both business and personal, in a press release, and the House Speaker's son is quoted as saying, "I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. St. Clair, and I am honored Mr. St. Clair has followed the same path I've taken," closed quote. Another CGI press release from March of 2017 proclaimed that the WSA's support for Paul Pelosi Jr. and the CGI in its quest for proper corporate and social governance, closed quote. Pelosi Jr. has not been charged or named in any public court documents in St. Clair's case. A $164 million fraudulent shares scheme. Orpalata Resources, a lithium mining company, announced Pelosi Jr. had joined the firm as the senior advisor in 2016. 1 month earlier, Orpalata's company leadership was accused of breaching its fiduciary responsibility and fraudulently issuing $26 million of shares without the approval of the board of directors, according to a 2018 Nevada civil lawsuit. The lawsuit, which was brought by Orpalata against its old management, claimed that the former chairman, president, and CEO awarded 16 million shares worth $26 million to themselves and close ally recipients without board approval, a move the lawsuit described as fraudulent. The company has since been changed, and its name has been changed to American Battery Metals Corporation. A source close to the company told thedailymail.com that Pelosi Jr. received $2.8 million of the allegedly fraudulent shares in 2016. This is redacted a bit, but we'll go ahead and take a stab at it. It says, quote, "Thank you for your attention to my stock certificate for ORRP number," there's blanked out, "for $2.8 million in shares." I guess that's 2.8 million shares. My name is Paul Pelosi, and I am emailing to remove the restriction. See the opinion from my lawyer, Michael Donahue. See letter and email below. Feel free to contact me or my lawyer with any questions. I have physical possession of the stock certificate. My mailing address is also redacted. Phone number is redacted. Please let me know the next steps. Sincerely, Paul. Sent from the iPhone, and the beginning of the forwarding message was actually from Michael Donahue, dated July 16th, 2018 at 6:21 p.m. PD time to Paul Pelosi, Orpalata Resources. They go on to say, Paul, attached is the 144 letter for the Orpalata shares. Review it carefully to make sure the facts are correct. Michael D. Donahue, president of Columbia Capital Securities Incorporated, Columbia Capital Advisories Incorporated, and everything else is redacted. Right below it says securities through Columbia Capital Securities Incorporated, member FINRA/SIPC. An email. This is the email from them showing the restrictions, and all of this good stuff is also going to be here. This is a lot of reading. I'm not going through all of that, but I will tell you that all of the information is here. To continue with the story, it says, the source said Pelosi Jr. bought the shares for $2,800 when their market value was between $4,228,000 and $5,152,000. According to the Boston federal prosecutors, the alleged fraudulent shares scheme was one of a collection of stock scams, all coordinated by a Swiss financier now convicted for the $164 million securities fraud. Prosecutors claim the financier replicated the alleged fraudulent activity in Orpalata and many other companies as a part of a massive global securities fraud scam or scheme that netted proceeds of approximately $164 million. In January of 2020, the man at the center of the huge pump and dump scheme, Swiss assets management firm Roger Knox 49, pled guilty to securities fraud. Documents from the federal case say Orpalata was one of several companies ensnared in the scheme. Knox now faces a sentence of up to 20 years in prison, 3 years of unsupervised release, and a fine of $5 million. Pelosi Jr. was not named in the criminal case or in the Nevada civil case brought by Orpalata. Pelosi Jr. declined to comment when contacted by thedailymail.com. For Headlines with a Voice, this has been the Lockhart News Brief.
Lockhart. Perspective.